Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Sexual Assault Awareness Month event. My name is Essence Winter, a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and graduating student with Trauma Informed LA. TILA is an all-volunteer grassroots organization founded in 2014. TILA's mission is to foster resilient communities that promote healing and well-being through collaboration, education, and community engagement. We started out as 10 social justice activists on a rainy day in LA in November 2014, and now there are over 3,000 folks who have participated. Today, we will be partnering with Somos Familia Valle. Somos Familia Valle is our local San Fernando Valley community organization led by trans, queer, people of color, dedicated to support, empower, train, and mobilize our families for racial, gender, environmental, and economic justice. As we get started today, we would like to also take a moment to acknowledge the original stewards of the land where our event takes place. TILA acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongvo people as the original land caretakers of Tobangar, which today is the Los Angeles Basin and Channel Islands. We are committed to uplifting the names of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. We also want to acknowledge the suffering and forced unpaid labor of enslaved Africans and African Americans, which enabled the start of this country. If you feel led, please put the name of the ancestor you would like to acknowledge today in the chat. Thank you. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the difficult and potentially activating conversation that is occurring today. If activated, TILA recommends incorporating healing practices such as moving, walking, running, pushing against a wall, connecting with people who are supportive and empathetic, and taking a break at any time. I will now be introducing our moderator for today, Selena Gray.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It is my honor to introduce our panelists for this evening. And thank you, Essence, for getting us ready to go. So we have Fatima. Fatima Sabina is a neurodivergent Indigenous queer. They are a fierce advocate for intersectional issues, human rights, undocumented immigrants, mental health awareness, and the LGBTQ+ community. They seek to create safe spaces through their organizing with Somos Familia Valle and through their floral business, Mona Rosa. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. To you and the little. Next, we have Amy. Amy Tilton serves as the Assistant Director for Take Back the Night Foundation. With an international focus, she has partnered with organizations from India and Cambodia to Kyrgyzstan and Nigeria. Amy brings a passion for wellness to this collective work to end sexual violence. Thank you so much for being here. We have Dr. Meghna Bhatt, a renowned national gender and social justice consultant, educator, feminist scholar, and storyteller based in Sacramento, California. Using creative, inclusive, accessible, and innovative tools such as storytelling, multidisciplinary art, and films, she is committed to fostering narrative and social change and community dialogue about gender violence prevention, education, and outreach. Dr. Bhatt is the creator and curator of Gulabi Stories, a South Asian healing initiative. Thank you and welcome. And we have Marissa Montes, the director and co-founder of Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic. She built LLJC while in law school in response to an unmet need for free immigration legal services on the east side of Los Angeles. Marissa serves as a visiting professor in Guadalajara, Mexico, where she teaches U.S. asylum law and serves migrant shelters. Marissa has tremendous experience working with survivors of sexual assault in the intersection of immigration and the LGBTQ plus population. Love and welcome you all. Thank you so much for being here. And so we're going to go on and get started with some questions for the panel. And then later we will have some time for Q&A. Feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go, everyone. So our first question, can you describe your work related to healing and activism? And anyone on the panel who would like to answer?
I can start.
Thank you.
Hi, Selena and Essence. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be a part of this amazing group. So in terms of my work related to healing and activism, in addition to being an independent gender and social justice consultant, educator, and storyteller, I'm also a first-generation immigrant from South Asia who has, I'm also a first-generation immigrant from South Asia who's lived here in the US for the past 18 years. I identify as a survivor of sexual violence and have witnessed intergenerational trauma in our extended families and communities growing up in India and also among the South Asian diaspora in the US. And as you explained, that I am also the founder of Gulabi Stories, so which uses oral and written storytelling to normalize conversations around healing and to unpack topics that are stigmatized, such as health, intimacy, body, identity, violence, and so forth and so on within the larger South Asian diaspora. So personally and work-wise for me, like personal is political as well, right? Whether it is being an educator, a storyteller, or an immigrant, or in this role at Gulabi Stories, I'm in the process of constantly exploring, redefining, and figuring out what healing may look like for me and in my community. And I'm realizing that healing does look different for everyone, right? So one of the things that I just want to wrap up this response is also like, for me, I'm more involved in like creating trauma-informed and accessible spaces and circles where we can use storytelling as a creative way for healing and also finding someone, finding our own voice. So thank you.
I love that. Thank you. And thank you for bringing into this space that healing is personal, it's unique. I think we often forget that. So thank you for bringing that. Anyone else would like to describe their work related to healing and activism?
I can chime in. Just want to say thank you so much for including me on this panel. This is an incredible honor to be here. And then just to reintroduce myself again, my name is Marissa Montes, and I'm a professor here at Loyola Law School, the director of the Loyola Immigrant Justice Clinic. And a lot of my work focuses on serving survivors who are part of the immigrant community, right? And in terms of healing, a lot of my work, I've kind of moved away from the notion of self-care or individual care, both when it comes to working with fellow advocates or my students here in the clinic and my clients, and move towards this notion of collective healing, right? And how we can build a community together and really share with one another the either incidents we've lived through or the experiences we've had to really rely on one another for healing. So that's Magna, I really appreciated your comments. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just wanted to echo like a little bit about what we do in our work is how can we push this notion of so being individual and really building community in a community that promotes healing.
Absolutely. And thank you for that beautiful segue. So you brought up this idea of community healing, and you mentioned a bit of both of you, your why. And so I guess that's the next question. We'd love to hear, what is your whys for doing this work, right? This is powerful, necessary work that the importance of it can never be overstated. So we'd love to hear about your whys.
I'll jump in here.
I started volunteering with Take Back the Night Foundation a few years ago. And for those of you who don't know, Take Back the Night is the oldest and largest movement toward ending sexual violence. Our mission is supporting survivors and raising awareness toward ending sexual violence. So as I said, I started volunteering a couple of years ago. And the more that I was working with survivors and hearing their stories, my passion for the cause just continued to grow. And as I heard those stories, I started making a personal connection and realizing that an experience that I had years ago also was a sexual assault, and coming to realize that it's not always evident to survivors at the moment of the experience. So that was an important learning moment for me of how it had impacted my own life, and then how I could use that to continue to fuel my passion for the work. And as I continue to hear more and more stories of survivors every day, I know there's so much work to be done, both on a personal and then, like you were saying, Marissa, a community level. And then, as we'll talk about more later through this program, I think also a systemic and change level.
Thank you, Amy. Anyone else? They're wise.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. So I could second that with Amy and Marissa and Magna. I agree with what you're saying with building community. It's all about, you start with yourself first, and speaking up is probably the hardest thing to do sometimes as a survivor, and opening up those spaces. So my why is really to create a safe environment for others to feel comfortable enough to talk about, the things that might trouble them. And so it's all about creating spaces where you can be vulnerable and seek comfort. So that's what Somos does for me. We basically ask our community members what their needs were, and we answer by creating workshops or healing meetings centered around that. So for us, we did healing sessions like yoga, meditation, breathing, affirmations, journaling, and also spiritual work. So just pretty much all-encompassing and intersectional work as well.
I thank you for sharing that, Fatima. I'm getting a bit emotional because I'm thinking of my journey and how no one ever asked me what I needed, right? They told me. And so can I ask another question? Just so when you talk about the healing for folks who have victims, survivors, thrivers of sexual assault, what does healing look like?
I mean, like you said, or someone said, it looks different for everyone. It's definitely troubling how often it happens. I think, unfortunately, many of us have experienced sexual assault and sexual violence, or we've heard about it occurring around us. So for me, it was pretty isolating. Depression definitely hit. But I knew I had to seek community and guidance, and I was able to do that within Somos, and that was really beautiful to experience, to be able to speak up and really talk about the things that you tend to want to hide, and so that's what that looked like for me: journaling, meditation. Chanting with my Buddhist practice.
Thank you. Anyone else? What would you say that healing looks like after sexual assault?
I can go next. This is Meghna Bhatt here. I think, like we shared before, for me on an individual level, it took me a long time to recognize and realize what happened to me was not right? Whether it was street harassment, being catcalled, or sexual violence and oppression, that was wrong, and nobody deserves that, including myself. I think for me, I think healing showed up in different ways. My trauma from experiencing these different forms of sexual violence affected me in terms of, as Fatima described, was also for me was chronic physical and mental health struggles. PTSD, being hypervigilant, anxious, exhausted because of the constant navigation and decision making I took to avoid being harassed, right? I felt like that was my responsibility of not being harassed or assaulted. And I think healing showed up much later in my life. And that's why I'm like embracing healing in so many ways as a way of treating my younger self with compassion, forgiving myself for any shaming and any guilt. But I think it's also important, like in addition to seeking therapy, is also having difficult but important conversations about my healing journey with my partner, with my family and my friends. And I think sometimes healing looks like taking my medicines every day, sometimes taking a walk, and sometimes feels a little more exciting, like finishing a 5K on a Saturday morning. So I just, I feel like I think it also, I want to reiterate back to what Marissa mentioned, and I think Amy mentioned, was also about individual care and collective, or the collective healing and communal care. I think my focus has been shifting to that in terms of how does decolonizing care and self, in the healing looks like. How does that look like for me? So thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just want to comment in terms in the context of my work, right? And something that a dialogue that I often have as a student is with my students is us as the advocate, how can we make this process be one that is of healing for our clients, right? So our practice here in the clinic is focused on humanitarian forms of relief. So what does that mean? That our clients had to experience some pretty egregious things to qualify to even remain in the United States, right? And we're talking in the context of sexual assault. It's usually 3 forms of relief: T visa for victims of trafficking, U visa for victims of crime, or something called the Violence Against Women's Act. For those who've experienced basically battery or domestic violence at the hands of their partners, parents, or children who were US citizens or green card holders. And unfortunately, this process is re-traumatizing, right? Because our clients have to share their narrative to basically show that they are deserving of status in the United States, right? And so the process nonetheless is going to be re-traumatizing. So the conversations we always try to have with our clients is, one, how can we ensure that this is a safe space for you, right? One that you feel that is where you can come forward in sharing these details with us, besides just telling you that it's confidential. But also, how can we use this as a process to bring your power back, right? And empower you to tell your story, to tell your narrative, right? And have that then be something where we can get you status, right? So I always try to is like, how can I change the dynamic of power, right? To really empower my clients, to tell their story, to advocate for themselves. And it's been beautiful to see as well as to how many through this process have then gained the courage to pull others up, right? And so one of the most beautiful things about my work is then seeing my clients after they gain status become advocates themselves for others who've experienced similar situations. So I think part of it too is like healing for ourselves, but also in the work that we're doing, how can we heal those or facilitate the healing of those who we are serving?
Absolutely. That advocacy and activism is what comes up for me. Amy, I see you nodding. Any thoughts on that? This idea building on this addressing sexual assault and sexual violence and the healing through activism.
Absolutely. I totally echo what Marissa is saying. And I think that advocacy and activism, just like healing, can take so many forms. So being sensitive to what various people might need in their own activism journey, as well as their healing journey, is so crucial for Take Back the Night event holders around the world. Activism takes different forms. Marches and rallies have been around since the inception of the movement in the 1970s. Some of the earliest marches were held to affect change and bring awareness on a political level. for example, after the murder of Susan Spieth in Philadelphia in the 1970s, residents rallied to encourage change and bring much needed safety to the streets of Philadelphia. Also sharing our stories, as has been kind of a theme throughout tonight already, is so crucial in that activism journey. One of our mottos at Take Back the Night is shatter the silence to end the violence. And we believe that by speaking out and refusing to stay silent, there's power in that, and there is movement toward change.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you all. So again, I love this idea of activism, advocacy, and healing. And so I guess the question is, do you all see activism around sexual assault as political? And has your activism changed or been influenced by current political discussions at all? And I'd love to hear anyone speak to that.
Oh, go ahead. Definitely. I believe our bodies are and our rights are just intertwined. Everything is policed, and it is politics. It's just down to basically abortion and getting the right health care and speaking up about it. So for me, it's definitely built up so much anger in me that we don't have autonomy to our own bodies. At times, that's what it feels like. There's a threat to it. Luckily, we live in California, and those basic rights are protected. But it does empower me to go to the streets, to protest, to speak up about the injustices that are happening all over, not just in this country, but around the world. And so it does hit home when I see all these things that are going on, and it just eventually does, and it can turn into burnout. And so we have to learn how to go back to our self-care practices and healing modalities, and so prioritizing our rest is political. And so I'm definitely working on that, because I give and I give until I burn out. And so I'm trying to create boundaries so that doesn't happen.
I love that. Thank you. We recently did a table chat on sort of rest as an act of revolution, right? Which, like you say, our bodies have been commodified, and rest is a political statement. Self-care is very political. So thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else like to talk about this, to add to this? Would love to hear.
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think that affecting change often requires political action when we're affecting change on a systemic or a structural level. So much of the progress that's been made in the, especially on campuses, college campuses around this country, has been because of the work of activists and who have made shifts in the definitions of consent and what sexual assault is, who can be affected. And so, for example, my organization, our founder, Katie Kessner, she, after being the victim of date rape, she spoke out, and she was the first to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And then she went on to testify on Capitol Hill and help pass the Campus Security Act and Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights back in the 1990s. And so many of those predecessors of our movement have made change that has moved us forward, but there's still so much work to do on a campus-wide level, state level, national, and international. And so I think that political action is continues to be called for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Marissa or Magna, any thoughts on, or I guess ideas about how your activism has been changed or impacted by current political discussions?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Fatima was saying, right? We ourselves, we are political beings, right? We are being our bodies, who we are based on our gender, our sexuality, all of that is political, right? If you lack legal status or not. And I think it's the importance of just taking also an intersectional lens. And the fact that when we discuss all of these issues, sexual assault is not limited, for example, to one group, right? But everybody can be exposed to it, right? Or fall a victim. And how these different intersectionalities then impact that person, right? So, for example, someone who's undocumented is much less likely to report out of fear of retaliation, either by their abuser or by law enforcement, right? Versus someone who might be a US citizen and so on. So I think, yeah, so it's like us taking, I think more and more after Trump too, something we already knew is the importance of addressing the issue, this issue as being political and intersectional, right? And really continuing to push that lens forward, even under an administration that might seem as one that is much more favorable. Yeah. And so like not losing what is it called? Keeping the ball rolling when it comes to this as to how can we work in a way that is collective and intersectional if we truly want to address issues that are impacting survivors.
Thank you. Megna, I saw you were going to say something.
I think I'm just going to add like one quick point because I feel like everybody's been nodding, and so I know we are on the same page in terms of our work and lived experiences. I just wanted to add one thing. I think as a prevention educator, for me, again, whether it's activism or I think I mentioned earlier, personal is political. It's not just my survivorship, but also my immigrant identity and gender, that contributes to these experiences. I think in a bigger picture, I'm also recognizing that when I think communities, when we think about, that we're advocating towards ending sexual violence, it means we are only focused on sexual violence. And I believe that sexual violence does not happen in a continuum, right? There are other, I think Marissa beautifully addressed it, is about all these other different forms of oppression that are related to it. So whether it is creating equitable education and employment opportunities for young girls and women of color, right to creating housing opportunities and preventing food deserts to happen in a neighborhood, these are all parts of, I would say, like the vision or the solution. And I think that's what it becomes. It does become a part of the political narratives as well. And that's why I think we are so grounded in that. But I appreciate Fatima's reminder to like also focus on our own care and, to avoid burnout. So I appreciate that.